There is a story about a man who wears glasses, who then occasionally changes his clothes, in a phone box usually, and then rushes off to save the world. To most people, this man is ordinary. He calls himself Clark Kent. He works for a newspaper. What his colleagues don't know is that he's also known as Superman. He comes from somewhere else. He's indestructible. He can fly. He can shoot lasers from his eyes. But when he puts his glasses on, no one can recognize him. He's annoying. I'm not a fan. My problem with Superman is that he is definitely not like me. In fact, he's not like anyone. He's not like any human. As much as the myth, the story, the legend of Superman is about someone who spends his spare time saving humans and saving Earth, he's not one of us. He is a big cheat. He's from another planet. And beyond one material called kryptonite, he has no weaknesses. He may be exciting, strong, but he doesn't get my sympathy. He doesn't get my empathy. He should be called Super Not Man, in my opinion. The artwork, the image that is on the notice boards outside the church building at the moment, has an image of a phone box. And lying outside the phone box are two things: a discarded set of glasses, typical of Clark Kent, and also a crown of thorns. Superman, in his alter ego, is famous for taking off his sunglasses, rushing into somewhere small, changing, and then flying off with his cape to save the day. The crown of thorns comes from the story of another man, another story. That's a story about a man who lived about 2,000 years ago in the ancient Near East, a man called Jesus of Nazareth. And one of the books about his life and his death and his resurrection, which will involve that crown of thorns, is called Luke. And the writer of this material, Luke, has been so far telling his listeners about the beginnings of the story, about Jesus' birth. Jesus was Jewish. His Jewish parents were faithful to their traditions. So we've already heard that he was named, he was circumcised, he was presented at the temple in their capital city, Jerusalem. And then Luke tells us about something that happened when this boy, Jesus, was about 12 years old. The Jewish people were given 7 festivals by their God to help them remember their story. And for 3 of those, everyone, especially the men, were expected to travel to Jerusalem to celebrate the festival. It seems that Mary and Joseph were really faithful. They went every year. After this week-long Passover festival, Mary and Joseph at least set off for home. But we hear that the boy Jesus stayed behind, but his parents don't know that. I have to admit, I have at least one painful memory of leaving one of our children behind at a church service one Sunday. In my defence, I thought this child had gone home already, but I should have checked. And so on the way home, I did phone ahead and just double check. And as soon as I found out, I rushed back, but the damage was done. I will never forget that occasion, and I will never be allowed to forget that occasion. This story about a boy left in Jerusalem is not, as it turns out, a story about bad parents. For one thing, it wouldn't be unusual in a Jewish family in the ancient Near East to not always know exactly where your children are, because they lived and worked and certainly travelled in large, extended family groups of people. And so it wouldn't have been unusual to trust that your child was somewhere in the group with the young people. One of the highlights of some of the church retreats that we've been able to have, weekends away together with all different generations, is as parents and carers, knowing that your children are safe, and you might not know exactly where they are in the buildings or the grounds, but they're with other people who are looking after them. And this would have been exactly the same situation for Mary and Joseph as they travelled with their big party of people back from Jerusalem. But when Mary and Joseph work their way around the group and they do realise that Jesus is not where they expect him to be, they immediately start back to Jerusalem. And that's a whole day's journey. I don't fancy being on that journey. I can imagine some of the raised voices on that day's journey back to Jerusalem. So then it is the third day. A day that they left, a day back, and then searching around. So it's on the third day that they find where Jesus is. Where had he been staying for these 2 nights? Presumably with some of the people they'd stayed with for the festival. We don't know. But they search and they find him, and they find him sitting among the teachers. These would have been people who taught the Jewish scriptures, the Torah. They would sit, these teachers, around the temple and all the different courts, and students would come and sit with them, and they would debate backwards and forwards and hear and listen to different ideas. Luke wants us to know that Jesus, the boy, is fully involved in this. He's listening, he's asking questions, and as he gives his own answers, the level of understanding he has and the way he answers amazes everybody who is watching and listening. Let's get back to Superman for a minute. Superman, remember, is a cheat. He can do everything. It would be easy to get the idea from a story like this that Jesus is a cheat. That he can do everything, that he knows everything, even at age 12. But that's not Luke's story. That's not any of the stories we have about Jesus. It's actually not the story of the scriptures. It's not what's revealed. Instead, this is always a human story about a human boy like you and me. What's amazing is not how much he already knows, it's how much he wants to learn. It's not like he has all the knowledge in the world already downloaded in his head. Yes, Luke is saying that he's unique. And yes, he's saying that in some way, Jesus is the Son of God. That will become apparent in this story. But he's no cheat. He's no Superman. He's not from another planet. This Jesus is fully human. And in this story, he learns and he grows like every one of us. We're told his mum and dad are astonished and anxious. At least that's the English translation. The words in the Greek carry more of the weight of pain and anguish and mental agony and anxiety. This is a real story about the difficult relationships with 12-year-olds and their parents. This story rings true. These are the words of worried parents struggling with that reality that when you have a child, it's as if your own heart is ripped out of your body and then parades around, walking and breathing, but yet still attached to you. Why have you treated us like this, they say. Your father and I, another one starts. I recognise these kinds of statements. This is a real story. And then we get a 12-year-old response. What's the fuss? Why were you so worried? Didn't you know? Where else would I be? Luke tells us they did not understand. Let's think about that. The reality is, we don't understand. We don't understand each other. We don't understand each other immediately. None of us understands any other person immediately. My family, my friends, at this point in time remain a mystery to me in all sorts of ways. And that's okay. There is always more to find out, more to understand. And one of the beauties of relationships is that I get to find out more and more as the relationship grows and progresses. One of the themes of Luke's story is that almost none of the people around Jesus, including his own family, understand what he is doing, what God is doing, what God has always been promising, because it's so much more. But they get to be part of it, and also they get to understand more as the story progresses. But at times they don't understand, and that right now for Mary and Joseph is painful. But it's okay. It's okay not to understand for now. Thank goodness. Jesus also, at age 12, shows a classic preteen sensitivity to his parents' feelings by saying that didn't they know he should be at his father's business? Now, we know that Mary's in a lot of anguish right now, but I can only imagine what's happening in Joseph's heart, his Jesus' adoptive father, as he hears Jesus say he needs to be at his father's business in the temple. Luke is a brilliant storyteller. As well as the human drama that we're drawn into, he is pressing down on us in multiple ways, in all the ways that you can think of, that this message is about the Father's business. That Jesus is about his Father's business. That God the Father is at work in this story, in this boy, in this life and death and the resurrection. A boy who will grow to be a man who is revealing more than anyone else what the Father's business is, putting things back together, dealing with everything that gets in the way. And that will involve something painful that will happen on a third day, just like this little story. Jesus' response is not an insult to Joseph. It's part of themes in Luke's story. And Joseph, to his credit, does what any good parent does. He continues to look after the boy who's been entrusted to his care. He gets to be part of his journey, and that boy grows. As much as this story might have been about a stroppy and rebellious young boy, as much as this could have been a story about a cheating Superman type figure, it's neither. It's nothing of the kind. As unique as Jesus is, and the story tells us that. Note, he then returns to Nazareth and he is obedient to Mary and Joseph, just like every other Jewish child has to be. And then, like every other child, he grows. He grows in wisdom, he grows in stature. Just imagine the marks being made on the doorpost as he gets taller. And he grows in favour with God and man. The key relationships this story is always about: our relationship with the God who made us and our relationship with each other. We get to be part of this story. Jesus is at the heart of this story. Jesus gets our empathy and our sympathy. And we get to understand a little more as each part of the story unfolds.